Welcome to Hashtag Africa, a look at some of the week's top stories and more from across the continent. I'm Kathy Mutlahlana. Sudan and Somalia have described as unjustified a move by US President Donald Trump to sign a new ban for people traveling from 6 mainly Muslim countries. Somali President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, who is a dual US-Somali citizen, expressed concern over the ban. He called on Americans to focus on the estimated 150,000 Somalis who've contributed to the US economy rather than the few people who may cause problems. Lesotho is expected to hold general elections soon after the king dissolved parliament. The move comes barely a week after Prime Minister Hakainde Mosisili lost a no-confidence vote. Lawmakers voted in favor of replacing him with Monyane Moleleki. The country was plunged into a political crisis after a failed coup bid in 2014. And Uganda and Botswana rank first and second in the world with the highest percentages of women entrepreneurs. That's according to MasterCard's inaugural Index of Women Entrepreneurs. The index looks at how 54 economies, representing nearly 80% of the world's female labor force, differ in terms of supporting entrepreneurial factors. New Zealand and Australia are the developed countries with the highest number of female business owners. In Africa, we celebrate the rain because it brings life, but the continent often finds itself at the mercy of seesawing weather patterns. Several countries, including South Africa, Kenya and Somalia, are currently experiencing crippling droughts. And of course, further in the Horn of Africa, South Sudan having had a famine declared there. Let's talk to Professor Bob Scholes from the University of the Witwatersrand. Thanks for your time, Prof. The situation in South Sudan not really coming as a surprise. We've been watching it deteriorate there, haven't we?
Of course, we should also remember, Kathy, that a famine's not the same thing as a drought. You can have a drought and no famine. In this case, there has been a famine in parts of that region of Africa just because of social conflict, which means that the sort of reserves which are available and people's ability to harvest their crops have been impaired, quite apart from whether the rain might have failed or not.
Some reports have described, the famine that we are seeing, particularly in South Sudan, as one having been a self-created famine. There were warnings about this. We know about the ongoing conflict. Why was it allowed to get to this point?
That's right. We do have quite good advanced warning of this kind of drought event. And it's the same thing that affected Southern Africa last year. It's over for us now. It's a development of a circulation pattern in the ocean, which we know is the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon. And when it is in its one mode, the El Nino mode, South Africa is dry and the Horn of Africa and East Africa is wet. When it's wet down here, which it is this year, it's dry up there. So we can see these things coming about 18 months out. And that's plenty of time for people to get stocks in and to look after what they've got, except when governance has broken down, as it has in parts of the Horn of Africa.
What are some of the socioeconomic impacts of this kind of natural disaster then, as it has become?
So the immediate impact is typically on the poor and the marginalized. The elites and urban people usually get looked after first, but if you're out in hard to get at areas and you don't have money to purchase food, you take the brunt of it. Those are people who are really dependent on often their own crop production, and if that fails, they're in deep trouble.
Do we have effective drought mitigating strategies, especially for that region of the world, or at this point is the Horn of Africa basically relying on the relief that is provided by some of the international organizations?
Right, so we should always remember that drought is endemic in Africa, and it always has been. It has been for thousands and thousands of years. We have a climate which is prone to these wet and dry spells. So this doesn't come as a surprise to us, and traditional African societies had coping mechanisms as well. They relied on families and movement and stores to get them through these difficult periods. as our populations have grown bigger and become, more urbanized, so you depend more and more on social interventions for that purpose. And there's several lines of defense that you put in place. The first is just knowing that it occurs and having your plan in place before the crisis hits. The second is early warning, and there we have these systems that I was discussing, which can tell us, 12 or more months ahead that there's likely to be a drought. It's not a guarantee, but it's sort of a good indication. And then that's when you start putting into place mechanisms for getting in food and storing it and distributing it.
And let's bring it perhaps a bit further down to sub-Saharan Africa. What position do we find ourselves in currently? Have we been able to stave off that drought?
In South Africa, we did okay. We did have several months of warning, and grain was purchased on the international market. That's, of course, expensive, so it drives up the price of food, but that's better than starvation. And despite worries that our ports would not be able to handle the volume of imports, they managed. And so we did manage to stave off the hunger problems. There are other problems, of course, amongst the farming community. If you fail for 2 years in a row to get an income, you go bankrupt, and that has huge implications. All those farm workers, farms lying idle, it can be a great tragedy, and certainly people in the last drought in Southern Africa were placed in that position.
It certainly sounds like we need to have better intervention strategies in place, especially because individuals like yourselves can help in the prediction of what is to come, and also the mechanisms that need to be put in place to avert the worst case scenario that unfolds in the situation of a drought as we have been experiencing in sub-Saharan Africa. But of course, as you go further up the continent, the situation being rather dire, especially for those in Somalia and South Sudan. Professor Bob Scholes from the University of the Witwatersrand. Well, coming up after the break, Ghana celebrates 60 years of independence. We'll bring you that story in a moment. Thanks for staying with us. Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo says the country has run out of excuses for failing to end poverty and corruption. He was speaking during celebrations to mark the country's 60th independence anniversary.
Celebrations were held near where Britain lowered its flag and Kwame Nkrumah became the country's founding president. In 1957, independence, along with Nkrumah's support for liberation across the continent, gave the country a sense of national mission. This was backed by a belief its progress could be a template for the rest of the continent. Nkrumah pursued a socialist vision of development and was toppled in a 1966 coup that was followed by 3 others. Ghana has since held 6 peaceful elections since 1992. But its leader says the country of 26 million need to do more to live up to the promises of its founders.
60 years after those heady days, the mass of our people are still poor. After 60 years, we have run out of excuses, and it is time to set Ghana to rights and get our country to where it should be.
Ordinary Ghanaians, though, have an optimistic view of the future.
So I wouldn't say Ghana have met its potential, but it is in the process. It is meeting its potential as the first independent country in Africa. So with me, I'll say yes. It is meeting because in terms of economic, social, everything, I think we are moving, we are progressing.
As part of anniversary celebrations, Akufo-Addo launched the Osu Castle Presidential Museum, a project aimed at promoting Ghana's legacy. It opened with a special photographic exhibition showing Ghana's independence years and its heroes, and is expected to be a monument worth visiting as the country looks to boost tourism.
In Nigeria, the closure of Abuja's main airport has sparked fears it could cause severe economic damage. The country is already in a recession. The Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport will be closed for 6 weeks to allow renovations to take place. International airlines had complained the runway was causing damage to their aircraft. Passengers will be diverted to Kaduna Airport, but several airlines have refused to use it.
Kaduna is far north of Abuja, where we ordinarily fly to. And we took note of the fact that this might have an impact on our operations in a number of ways.
Malawi is desperate to boost its economy after it fell by 2.5% last year. This was partly due to a drop in export revenues from the country's main crop, tobacco. Now, Malawi is hoping hemp will help ease the situation.
Hemp has many uses, from food to clothing to construction material. But because it's from the same family of plants that produce marijuana, it remains banned in many countries. In South Africa, it's been grown for research and medicinal purposes. Calls for it to be commercialized are gaining momentum. Malawi is moving closer to achieving that. Authorities there are investing more than 100 million rand in the cultivation of industrial hemp. Private sector partners believe it's worth it.
The gap between our imports and our exports is widening. Imports are far much outstripping exports, so we need a diversification.
But the NGO Drug Fight Malawi is not convinced. It claims laws are being ignored after Parliament in 2015 allowed for further hemp research.
As soon as the member of Parliament who introduced this came out in Parliament, right away from that time up to now, young people are smoking, are using marijuana openly without any fear. That's just because of how the government is actually reacting to it. So that's the danger which we are fearing.
Despite concerns, the country plans to start cultivating industrial hemp commercially by the end of the year.
Well, let's take a quick look at what's been happening on social media this week. Some Nigerians slammed their government for advising citizens against any non-essential travel to the US. In the US, the matter was met with irony. US President Donald Trump's phone call to Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta prompted speculation about what was discussed, as some interesting conspiracy theories soon emerged. And where in Africa is Will Smith? Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania all claimed this week that the Hollywood star was on their soil. Some even suggested the actor himself didn't know where he was. Fortunately for all involved, it was later confirmed he was in Tanzania. There was high excitement at Africa's top film festival, FESPACO, held in Burkina Faso this past week. There were more than 1,000 films in the competition that attracted more than 100,000 visitors. Senegalese French director Hélène Gomez took the much-coveted Golden Stallion of Yenenga Award for his film Felicity. It's a drama about a woman working as a singer in a bar while struggling to take care of her son amid the realities of life in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Well, that's it from us for now. Until next time, stay tuned to ENCA for all the latest news.